Well, again, a warm welcome to each of you and a special welcome to our guests and newcomers today. We're so glad you're here today as we celebrate this beautiful Labor Day weekend and give thanks for workers and all those who offer themselves in service and labor. We also celebrate Buffalo Grove Days, a big celebration in our community. And as we said earlier in the service, we have folks who are going to be walking in the parade today that steps off at 11, and we've prayed over them, and we'll continue to be in prayer for them. Amen? Amen. Today we do begin our new sermon series, The Game of Life, Real Faith. And over these next 5 weeks, we're going to look about how does Jesus call us to a fuller life and a more abundant life, but more importantly, a real life and a real faith that lives and works in this broken world of which we're a part. Amen? And so part of what we decided to do was kind of take a look at this game of life. And I asked earlier in the service, but how many of you have played a version of the game of life, right? Many of you have. So I thought I had the most recent version of the game of life. I played it as a kid. I bought it a couple of years ago, but this is already out of date. There's a new one, 2019 version, I think. You now can have pets instead of children. Isn't that interesting? So they're little pegs that look like dogs and cats. So it's kind of fun. So I feel already out of date, but I'm trying to avoid Amazon's temptation. Amen. Amen. So I want you to think about, this is the game guide to Game of Life, and in some ways, in reading it and preparing for today, it just reminded me of how hard it is to live real life and real faith in the world. Listen to this. This is how to play from the game of life. Hit the road for a roller coaster life of adventure, family, and unexpected surprises. The wealthiest player always wins. Somebody should say amen there, right? That's a problem. You'll win tokens, cars, pegs, children, and money packs. There are ways to invest, there are ways to pay off, and there are ways to take a loan. In fact, you can take loans upon loans upon loans. Sounds like another temptation, amen? It's all about the person on top at the very end. In fact, it says, to add up your final wealth, sell your houses, collect cash for your kids, turn in your action cards, repay your loans, count your cash, and wait till everyone's retired, and the one with the most stuff wins. Well, that's how the world defines life, amen? And it's funny, I never thought about playing this game. That's how it defines life. In fact, the game of life is one of the oldest board games in this country. People don't realize that the game of life started in 1860, before the Civil War began. That was invented by a lithographer who had two famous pieces. One was the invention of this game. The other is he was famous for a picture of Abraham Lincoln without a beard, okay? As you can imagine, as Lincoln grew that long beard, that picture kind of fell out, and the guy had no kind of connection to that, but he invented this game. It was called the checkered game of life, and it looked like a checkerboard, and you began at birth and you ended at death, so it was a little more realistic, right? But its whole purpose was to be successful, and even in 1860, wealth was a sign of success in this country and in our culture, and the temptation continues. So we have all played the game of life. There's a spinner involved. Aren't you impressed with the spinner? Amen, right? That was the temptation of Amazon, confess, right? And you have cards, and there are all kinds of things, and people get cars, and you have a choice to do a career or college, and you take out loans, and there are all kinds of things, and you go through mountains, and you go through all kinds of stuff. Inevitably, you're working to get to the end of the board, right? But we all know that life is somewhat like that, but somewhat more complicated. And then what the game of life doesn't stir in is the abundant life found in Jesus, and how do we live real life and real faith in the journey. This past week and the week before has been an interesting journey for me. I've had 2 weddings in a row. Jackie Cece was married to Paul Berta last week at the Metropolis in Arlington Heights, and then yesterday Kelsey Bosman married Colby Lehman at the 311 South Wacker building downtown, which is the Cake Top building. And it's fascinating doing weddings outside the church because there are folks there that don't have connection to the church, right? And I find myself realizing that weddings are an important place to be in the world, right? I didn't think that years ago when I started ministry, right? But now you connect with people and hear stories of people that are not within the journey of the church, right? But who are longing for something, right? So last week at the wedding at the Metropolis, I ended up having a conversation with the wedding coordinator about life and, what our church was about and do we do anything for the poor. And then one of the guests there had a conversation with me afterwards about the wedding and about how she had once been in the church, but her brothers had been abused in the church, and so she couldn't be a part of it anymore. And then this past week, I was part of a journey at this wedding, and I just can't tell you, I got into a conversation with one of the workers who just wanted to know who I was and what this was about. And then I just had conversations with people that attended the wedding, one of which was a guy, I just love this. It's a guy who lives in our community. He's Jewish, but he said, I'm not really a person of faith. But then we talked about faith for 30 minutes, right? You know what I'm saying? And what it says to me, friends, is that the way the church does ministry and mission and service in the world is changing. And we have to change with it, amen? And it makes us uncomfortable to think about that we used to believe, build it and they will come, right? You know what I'm saying? We've got a great facility, of which is a major part of our ministry. But the reality is, the shift is, we can't wait here for people to come. We have to be out there building relationships, not to get people in the pews, but because we love them. Amen? Come on, folks. Amen? Amen. I just realized that over and over again over these last 2 weeks. Pastor Clayton and I, we've decided to start doing our staff meetings together at Starbucks in Wheeling, the new one. And I think many of you have heard this story, that we were sitting there kind of talking about ministry and how challenging it is and how the world is changing. This young man comes up and gives us 2 Starbucks cards. And he says, I heard your conversation, and I admire people who are in ministry in our current reality. Isn't that amazing? That's the world we live in. And though we celebrate all the people who come here on Tuesday nights to find a home and to sleep here and to eat here and to shower here, though we celebrate every Thursday that people come and receive food in our food pantry and sustain their families, and we're all part of that, amen? And we're grateful for that. But what we know more than ever in the game of life is that it's going to be less about what comes here and how all of us go out there. That's where we're headed. And really, it connects to the story today. This beautiful story, and it's not an intense story. It's probably not a story you would remember well because it's what's called a connecting story. It connects in the Gospel of Matthew, Jesus' early conversations around the Sermon on the Mount to his mission discourse about how the church has to be in the world. And you remember Matthew is a gospel written. It's the first one in our lineup. Probably Mark is the oldest. But it's a gospel written to a Jewish Christian audience, Jews who had converted to Christianity and were trying to figure their way out in a world of persecution and, in fact, kind of being left out of the synagogue and trying to reframe what it was. And so as Matthew puts together the stories of Jesus and his teachings, all of that's in his mind, right? And so I want you to hear these words, and they are really more profound than I think we hear. Jesus traveled among all the cities and villages. So he's not sitting in the church, amen? Hello, I got to hear an amen out there, right? He does teach in the synagogues, but he announces the good news of the kingdom everywhere and heals every disease and every sickness. Now, when Jesus saw the crowds, he had compassion. And I really think that is the motivator for us as followers of Jesus when we live real life and real faith, right? When we see the needs of people, we have compassion. If we immediately move to judgment, then we've missed the call of Jesus in our heart, right? When we see the needs of people, we don't go, well, right? Which I sometimes do. Maybe you're all very holy and sacred. Amen, right? But sometimes we move into a judgmental position, right? But the reality is when Jesus saw the crowds, he had compassion. And compassion should be the center of our life as we look to the world in service. Because they were troubled and helpless, or in one translation, harassed and hurt. These are the people on the margins. These are the folks who are being persecuted. These are the folks in the economic system that can't make it. These are the folks living with dysfunction or challenge or hurt or illness or fear or loneliness or addiction or whatever it may be. These are the folks who are helpless and harassed, hurt and lost. And when Jesus saw them, he had compassion because he knew they were sheep without a shepherd. And we hear that, and I don't know if anybody on a farm with sheep. Wow, this is a lonely crowd, right? All right. I grew up on a farm with sheep, and sheep are not very smart sometimes, right? And they need guidance, and they can get lost, and they panic easy. Sounds like myself. Amen, right? Jesus is basically making a commentary on religious leaders of the day. In fact, with Matthew's quote of this, Matthew might be speaking to the church today, that sheep don't have a shepherd because the church has forgotten to be in mission in the world, just like the prophets confronted religious leaders in their time. Then he said to the disciples, "The size of the harvest is bigger than you can imagine. There's so many people in need. There's so many potentials for relationships. There's so many opportunities to share the gospel, more than you can imagine. But there are very few workers," right? You know what I mean by that. And therefore, Jesus says, plead with the Lord to send out workers for the harvest. Pray every day that people will come and be able to go out into the community and to make connections, not in a place of clobbering people over the head with the gospel, but building a relationship with people because we love them, and when we see the crowds in need, we have compassion. Then Jesus shifts in the gospel in chapter 10. Jesus then moves from this whole discourse of the Sermon on the Mount, blessed are, and all the teaching, and all that is foundational to our life, but Jesus does something interesting. He doesn't do it all by himself. Wow. I need to listen to that, right? I know, you know, right? I can't do this by myself. You can't do this by yourself. Jesus couldn't do it by himself. If he can't do it by himself, none of us can, right? Unless you think you're better than Jesus, then that's worth a conversation, right? He called 12 disciples, another word for followers, and he gave them authority over unclean spirits, drawing out that which is broken, to throw them out of people, to bring them to wholeness, to heal every disease, to cure every sickness. He gives it to the 12. Now, the 12 is important. That's a number that connects with the 12 tribes of Israel. This is all intentional. And he goes on, he says, here are the names of the 12 apostles. And we hear this and we go, oh yeah, James, thanks. I memorized those in confirmation or in guidelines or whatever. But I want you to hear the names because it's important in the way that Matthew names them. Ready? The first was Simon, who's called Peter, so he reminds us that Simon's name got changed by Jesus and was named the Rock. You remember that. And Andrew, his brother, and so he wants you to know the two of them are together, and he connects them together. James, the son of Zebedee, and John, the brother, again, two more fishermen brought together and paired together. Do you see? 2 by 2 by 2. And we're not talking about the ark, right? Okay. And then Philip and Bartholomew together. Thomas and Matthew, the tax collector. Wow. Now, you and I don't think much about that. But remember, tax collectors were corrupt, and they collected more money than they needed. And so when the early church read this and said, oh, Bartholomew and Matthew, the tax collector. Jesus calls all kinds, amen? That's good news for us. James, the son of Alphaeus, who has some tradition, and Thaddeus, and then the last two are fascinating. Simon the Canaanian, and Judas who betrayed him. So already, Matthew wants you to know, Jesus called 12, and they weren't all perfect. Amen? Simon the Canaanian, this is fascinating. The Canaanians were zealots. In fact, he's sometimes called Simon the Zealot. These were folks trying to revolt against Rome, right? He was a militant, right? Jesus calls militants, right? And then he also calls people who sometimes betray him, right? But he calls them nonetheless. So when I read that list, I actually feel great, right? Because then it says that Jesus calls all of us. It's not just a few people. It's not the pastor. It's not the president of the United Methodist Men, though they're all called. It's everybody in the room, right? We're all essential to the mission. And as Jim said later on, the 12 won't be enough, and Jesus will call the 70. And then as you know, at the end of Matthew, the whole mission shifts from ministry among the Jewish community to the Great Commission, sending forth all of these folks into the world to share the good news, right? So today, and it's funny we start this way, because usually you would start with your personal relationship with Jesus and your own self-reflection. But as we prepared for today, and because today we're sending folks into the community, we thought, what better way to start this question of what is real life, what is real faith, by asking the question, how are we serving others, right? So it's interesting, last night at the wedding, I've had a lot of conversations, and this woman came up to me and she said, I just want you to know, you don't know me. I live in the community, and I'm part of another faith community, but I serve in your PADS program almost every Tuesday night, our homeless shelter. And she said, I am so grateful for that opportunity because I realize that my faith is not complete if I'm not serving others. Wow. I may call her up and have her speak here. Amen? She reminded me that when we're not serving beyond ourselves, then we're not complete in the abundant life to which Jesus calls us. Amen? Julie Dagenet, she's not here so I can talk about her, right? Okay? Julie has a heart for creating groups. And I think this is a great thing. She's been a group co-leader, but she's discerned through prayer and discernment that that's not really her calling. Her calling is to create support and interest groups so people have a place. Isn't that amazing? So she created Caravan, which is the group that goes and sings in nursing homes during the holidays. Some of you are a part of that, and maybe if you're not, you want to be. But also she's created the parade group. We used to coordinate the parade through the office, and it wasn't great fun, right? I mean, it was fine. But she's created this whole community of people who want to walk together and be an example to the community. Amen? And you know what? She's not done. She has a heart now for families with family relatives in the military, because her own son is as well, right? And so she's going to start in the next couple of weeks a group for people here and in the community who have a sibling or a son or a daughter or a friend in the military who want to come together and support each other and support them. Isn't that awesome? Come on, folks. I know it's Labor Day, but really, amen, right? So she motivates me to think more clearly that if we are going to be a relevant church for Jesus Christ in the 21st century, it's not all going to happen here, right? It can't. It won't. It never did, right? That unlike spending our top and getting our car in pegs and making it, to, in the old version, millionaire acres, right? That's not abundant life. Abundant life, real faith is serving others. Jen's here. She's been coordinating Harvest Fest, right? And somebody say, oh, it's a busy weekend. Get over it, right? Harvest Fest is one of our biggest outreaches to this community. 400 plus children come to this facility. Don't you think Jesus would love for you to be there, right? So think about it. Jen's going to be back there ready to sign you up today. And I think today you're going to do it. You can miss something to make something happen for a child in this community. Will you be Jesus? Will you be Jesus to the world? Will you live real life? And will you live real faith? And the people of God said, amen. So we invite you to stand now as we prepare to go back into the world. So the game of life is a joy. Amen?
Amen.
And the game of life can be hard. Amen?
Amen.
Some of us know that well. So part of the joy is we have each other as the community of Jesus. But part of how Jesus transforms our hearts is calling us to go into the world and serve others. There are lots of sheep out there without a shepherd. Amen?
Amen.
And they're in need of you. Let's go forth. Amen.
Amen.